in order to really understand how a business works, you have to understand cause and effect. You have to understand leading and lagging indicators. You have to understand how to measure the quality of work through conversion rates, as well as the throughput of a team through the volume of work they're doing. And so you need to understand a lot of these concepts and then understand, well, if marketing does this, how does it affect sales? If sales does this, how does it affect the customer service team? If product does this, how does it affect any of those teams, right? And so I think most people get lost in trying to understand that or model that with numbers.
You're listening to RevOps Champions, a podcast created for B2B leaders to help you align your people, streamline your processes, trust your data, and leverage technology in order to grow your business. We're your hosts, Brendan Denawel, CEO and co-founder of Denamico,
and Amy Weaver, Denamico's marketing director.
So in 2008 or 9 is when I started the HubSpot Partner Program as a sales rep there. And then, now it generates, I think, 40%, still generates like 40% of HubSpot's revenue. And
it's kind of a big deal.
Yeah, more than $1 billion in revenue. And I was there running that program, managing the sales team, managing the program for the 8 years of my time. So until 2017, I left HubSpot, left it in the capable hands of the management team there, and then ended up joining Databox as CEO. So just to have that background out for your listeners. And then more recently, they made some changes to the program. I don't know which changes you're referring to exactly. I do know a lot of the changes, but there are a bunch of them. So could you maybe be more specific about what changes you think?
We believe the changes are all aligned with where HubSpot is going. So where HubSpot came from and where HubSpot is going, which, within the HubSpot ecosystem, we call it moving up market. Again, so even like for our ICP, we don't target companies that have more than 2,000 employees, for example.
Okay.
Even 500 or 1,000 person companies were not our target, 10 years ago when we were working, more closely together. So I think a lot of the evolution has happened, as HubSpot has evolved. But of course, the partner ecosystem needs to evolve with the product.
Yeah, so I think you know this, Brendan, but Denamico and many other agencies who were early HubSpot partners were marketing agencies, and you were building websites and doing SEO and pay-per-click and writing content and helping people capture leads with ebooks and landing pages and offers and all that stuff. And that stuff's still important. I'm sure you still offer those services.
No, we don't, but that's okay.
You don't? Okay. Yeah. Many agencies in the HubSpot Partner Program do still.
Yes.
And more recently, not too recent, really, 7-8 years ago, HubSpot launched a customer relationship management system. And then that CRM system has gotten so much more sophisticated. We use it. We're a customer of HubSpot at Databox. And the capabilities of it lend themselves well to bigger companies. And I think the marketing product is also lends itself really well to bigger companies as well. And the combination of the marketing, the sales, and the service, and the RevOps, the operations hub, and the more sophisticated content management system they have, all that lends itself well now to upmarket customers. And so when you're serving those larger customers, obviously there's bigger opportunities for solutions partners at HubSpot. So it's a great evolution for HubSpot, for the partners, for the world, for their customers. I'm extremely long on HubSpot as a company. Yeah, no, I think it's a great opportunity. It's kind of forced them to change the partner program quite a bit. I don't know if that's what you were getting at in terms of how the partner program works.
Yeah. We're seeing it as a lot more of collaborating, co-selling,
co-delivering. Yep.
Yeah.
Co-delivering.
Which again is what's happened in every other CRM ecosystem, that is 10, 20, 30 years older than HubSpot. It's just a natural evolution.
Yeah, any enterprise software ecosystem, that's the mode, right? It's generally the software company has built complicated, sophisticated software that requires specialized skills to implement according to the business processes of the company implementing it. And usually the software company doesn't want to be in that business. They want to be in the business of selling and marketing and making and selling and marketing software, but not in the implementation. And so I think HubSpot's naturally gone in that direction, and the partners that have evolved their service offerings are in a great position to offer those services. And HubSpot wants that because they want to keep their costs lower and not have the overhead of a team as sophisticated and mature as Denamico on their books. They want partners off their books that can do that stuff. So it works well for everybody, customers, partners, and the software company. Yeah.
Right. So you touched on this a little earlier. So we made the decision 5 years ago, because as the HubSpot product had evolved and the CRM became more and more powerful and continues to become more and more powerful, and they'd sort of introduced this full stack from marketing, sales, and service. Obviously still having the CMS hub, and then now adding a couple more hubs. What we realized about 5 years ago was that we had to make a decision, and a lot of partners haven't made this decision. They've decided to try and do marketing services in addition to CRM implementations. We just felt like if we wanted to be, well, first of all, if we wanted to be good and focused, and I know you're a big fan of being a little more niche focused as well. And so as part of our journey of starting to be more specialized, we were like, okay, we would rather focus on the complexity or the opportunity that comes with the complexity of implementing HubSpot versus, which 90% of the ecosystem plus is still focused on how do you support HubSpot customers from a marketing perspective, like so all the list of things you mentioned earlier, to generate leads. We realized we couldn't be good at both, at the size company that we were, and the knowledge of what we'd done in the past was super helpful, but we wanted to be focused and really good at the technical implementations, which of course require different people, etc. But it's just interesting to see that evolution and think about it and discuss it with people like yourself who have a really good lens on it. Because I know, which kind of brings us into, I guess, the next thing that I want to make sure we talked about as well, which is your transition then to Databox. Can you give us like a bit of a backstory or an introduction to how that happened and what Databox does, and maybe how Databox has evolved since you joined?
For sure. So I was looking for my next challenge. While the HubSpot partner program has evolved and grown significantly since I left, to me, the path of like 0 to 1, or in the case of this, 0 to 100 million, it was fun for me. I could say that maybe the 70 to 100 million wasn't as fun for me. It was much more on repeat. And again, there's been changes, and I look back over 7 years since I've left, there's been a lot of changes, especially as a result of the product evolving. But from my lens, it was just moving a lot slower than the first 9 years that I was there. And so I just wanted a new challenge. I knew that I wanted to continue to work with professional services firms. I love helping professional services firms market and sell better and deliver ROI better. And so I had plans to start my own thing. I'd started meeting with early stage VC firms. And one of those firms said, hey, you got to meet somebody in our portfolio. It seems to really align with your target market and align with the product, similar to the product that you want to build. And so I ended up connecting with the founder of Databox. They had raised a large amount of money, 3.8 million in their seed round. And unfortunately, the success they had before they raised the seed round of selling the product did not multiply. So they were actually rebooting the company and refocusing on a different target market. So when I came in, there wasn't really much revenue, but they did have a product. I should say, kernel of the product has evolved quite a bit since then. But they had a product. It did things that I thought would help marketing agencies, which at the time was the core, my core network from HubSpot. And so I jumped on board to start building that business. The reality of the business is there was a lot to figure out. It's a really complicated product. We build and maintain integrations with 100 other software companies, including all of the HubSpot hubs, and as you imagine, every one of those 100 companies are constantly changing and evolving, not just their interface, but the data they're storing and the metrics that they produce. And so building that, plus building all of the capabilities of our software to enable users to create custom dashboards, custom reports, set and track goals, do benchmarking, forecasting, all the stuff we've built, plus those integrations. It's a complicated product. And I did raise another $1 million when I joined. But since then, we've bootstrapped. There wasn't much left of the original. So when I joined, it was like 1.8 million in the bank. And that's kept us moving for the last 7 years. And we still have more than $1 million in the bank. So we really haven't burned much at all. So yeah, that was the story. We now have about 3,000 customers using us. A little less than 1,000 of those customers are some kind of professional services firm. A lot of them are marketing agencies. There's a bunch of RevOps agencies. Increasingly, I'm seeing RevOps agencies kind of get into performance management and analytics more. And then there's some sales consultants and trainers. There's a few accountants that use us to help monitor and report financial data to their clients. So a good portion of those partners of ours are professional service firms.
Cool.
So one of the advantages that we're seeing with companies who are sort of adopting this RevOps framework is that they are able to scale at a much quicker pace than maybe another company that seemingly has similar resources, headcount, that sort of thing. You have been involved with some pretty meteoric team growth, I would say, in your job experiences. So can you identify some key elements of those teams who are able to scale efficiently as opposed to maybe some other teams who just haven't got it figured out?
Yeah. RevOps is a relatively new term in my career, at least. I know it's been around for a few years, but if we largely consider it, I don't know how exactly you define RevOps, but I look at it as like the systems and processes that enable teams to do their jobs, and specifically focused in on revenue teams. So marketing, sales, customer service, et cetera. So if that's close enough to our definition, your definition, then I would say that stuff is critical. We were doing RevOps at HubSpot before anyone even thought of that, mentioned that term.
Was calling it that. Yeah.
I'm an engineer. I think like half of the management team at HubSpot were engineers. And so we were just always very data driven. When the company was formed in that 2006, 2007 range, there was a large transition going on of companies moving their marketing online, where things became a lot more measurable and predictable. And I think that just lent itself really well to what we were good at, which was sitting down with a spreadsheet and saying, how big can we be? And then using some of our experience to say, well, what can we do to get there? And then modeling that out and setting goals based on that, and really running and setting budgets and hiring plans all based on that stuff. And so I think what separates companies that grow relatively quickly versus ones that don't, they really have to have that discipline. And it's a matter of connecting the financial model with the sales and marketing model, and really understanding what levers you can turn or pull to drive growth, whether that's growth in revenue or what's more fashionable these days is driving efficiency and profitability. Either one of those, right? Whether you're driving revenue or profit, you have to be thoughtful about the bets that you're making and the investments you're making. And I think RevOps is like, gives at a minimum, what RevOps can do is give you your historical data to be able to start saying, well, this seems possible. We know that we can crank up our paid ads and generate more conversions. We know that we can run Facebook and LinkedIn retargeting ads and get more of those anonymous visitors back to our site to convert. We know that if we invest in sales enablement and better processes in the CRM or automation for the sales team, more signals for the sales team so that they know when to call people and stuff, then we can make our sales team more efficient. And so if you start gathering like all of those that data from those processes, you can start to say, all right, well, here's what's possible, and start building out a model and then the systems to enable all that stuff. So I think that to me is a huge differentiator. I learned a lot about that at HubSpot, and then we've implemented a lot of stuff in a Databox similar, but we've also really studied like objective and key results, OKRs. And of course, we use our own product. We have data coming out of our wazoo about our own business. We're very hardcore about implementing processes across all of our customer-facing teams in order to ensure we have repeatability and measurability. And we sit down once a year. We model out growth every quarter, every month, or every week. The teams are looking at how they're doing. Every month, we're reporting that all the way up and saying what we did and what we didn't do, what worked, what didn't. And then every quarter we recalibrate our goals, adjust investments in certain areas, green light experiments or projects to improve throughput or efficiency, and then do the process all over again. Those are the systems and processes that separate companies that are reliably growing versus ones that aren't.
So with data out the wazoo, how do you sift through and decide which of those data points are meaningful to you, which ones help you make the most informed decisions? Because a lot of our conversations that we have with people are around data as an asset, but also as a liability. So curious to get your take on that.
Yeah, I don't think data is a liability unless you don't know how to interpret it, in which case people spend a lot of time interpreting it. Or if you're not thinking about data in the context of a system, in which case you could be optimizing things that aren't going to have an impact on the ultimate goals of revenue growth and profitability. But in my experience, mostly with SaaS businesses, right, it's actually quite complicated, but also extremely predictable. So there's so many different flows in a SaaS business in terms of revenue. So there's, of course, new customers, there's upgrades, those customers, there's downgrades, those customers, there's cancellations, there's reactivations. So there's 5 different revenue flows that you can, as a SaaS company, optimize one way or the other. And then, of course, the most important one is your average revenue per customer. And so if your average revenue per customer is higher and you're getting the same amount of new customers, right, that's a meaningful impact. If your average revenue per customer is higher and that allows you to upgrade a lot of your customers over time, then that's a really meaningful impact on growth and profitability as well. So for a SaaS company, it's a matter of understanding all of those flows and then understanding how you can influence those things. So the 3 most important ones that we focus on at Databox, which is really the same ones we focused on at HubSpot, is the amount of new MRR or new customers, monthly recurring revenue or new customers. It's the upgrade volume, MRR or number of customers, and then it's cancellations. And so with each, we actually have OKR leaders for each of those 3 areas. And I own the new customer one right now until I hire a VP of marketing. And so within that annual OKR of get X amount of new customers this year, that's broken down by quarter and by month. And then we go levels deeper and we have different ways of driving new customers. So one way is through organic search. We got the majority of our new customers find us from organic search, convert it and sign up for our free product and then become a customer from there. But I also have other levers. I have a co-marketing team that works with our partners to generate joint leads, which you know about. And then we have a paid team that's pretty new. We're still figuring out how much we can scale that up and whether that's cost effective. But that's one lever that we have to drive. Then once somebody signs up for our free product, we want to get them to be product qualified leads. So similar to marketing qualified lead or sales qualified, product qualified lead means basically that they are setting up the product to a certain extent. And so we have a product manager and then people that work with him to help improve that over time. We have a sales assisted funnel, a support and sales assisted funnel. So if somebody signs up for our free product, they might have a question, in which case they can start a chat and the support team's there to help. And if the support team spends a certain amount of time, they'll create a deal. And the support team will also offer time on our sales team's calendar, which always creates a deal. We also make our sales team available through links on our website and links in the app in the software. And so people book time there. And so I have OKRs or sub OKRs, secondary OKRs for almost every one of those: organic signups, paid signups from our co-marketing, number of PQLs, the PLQ sign up to PQL conversion rate, number of deals created, and then of course, number of customers closed. Some of which are self-serve. Some of our customers try our product and buy it without talking to our sales team. And then most of it, like 70% or so, go through our sales team and at least have one call. So that's how we manage it, is just starting at the top, which is overall net growth of our company, and then working its way down all the way to signups from co-marketing, or number of PQLs, or number of deals created, et cetera.
Yeah. So that's really interesting I guess, Amy, this is probably more directed at you than at Pete, but Pete, as Amy was saying, we've heard like in quite a few interviews that we've done in the last few weeks, this theme of data can be an incredible asset. And obviously in the line of business and the actual business that you're in, it's no surprise that the idea of data being liability hasn't even entered your mind. But for a lot of companies, especially when you have leaders joining a company that hasn't been very clear about what they're called, what you will, AKRs, KPIs, metrics, the data, they end up realizing, in fact, we had a discussion this morning, realizing that nobody really knows what to do with all the data that they're collecting. Whereas obviously for you, that doesn't make any sense because everything you do starts with, that's very strategic about what is the data we should be tracking at every step of the customer journey, essentially.
And who gets visibility to it. I mean, that's another thing.
In our business, everyone has visibility, every single person. And I think that's an important thing. I can't empower the product manager who's in charge of driving PQLs unless he understands what the sign-up volume is, right? And unless he understands the ultimate close rate. It's like, in fact, we meet with, there's 4 or 5 people involved in that one OKR. We each have responsibility for the sub OKRs. And we meet and say, hey, it looks like we're down on PQLs right now. Is there anything that you can do, PQL product manager, to drive deals directly for the sales team? And he's like, yeah, I don't think I can influence the PQL number this week, but I think I can help you book 20 more calls for the sales team. And so, like, without that transparency and visibility across the teams and people can't problem solve. And so that, I think that's so important, is transparency.
Mm-hmm. The visibility is absolutely important.
Pete, there's another question I'm really curious about, because you talked about a lot of your OKRs at Databox, but the two that I didn't hear you talk about, and probably because for you in the SaaS space, I'm thinking it could be just because it's so obvious to every SaaS leader that the ultimate 2 metrics that you're tracking are LTV and CAC. Is that still the case?
Yes, absolutely. So yeah, they're just not as directly influenceable by the team. I'm obsessed actually with LTV because I want to improve our net dollar retention, which is basically, the amount of money a certain set of customers are paying in a certain future time. The only way I can improve that net dollar retention, not the only way, but the main way I can improve that net dollar retention is by having upgrade paths. And so I'm obsessed with LTV, lifetime value of the customer. Of course, the other way to improve LTV is by reducing churn. But in a business like ours, where it's largely self-serve or sales assisted and month-to-month contracts and all that, it's really difficult to reduce the churn rate further without reducing the sales rate up front.
Okay.
I'm obsessed with upgrades. Also, I think by us obsessing over upgrades, we're forced to innovate and add more value for our customers. And I think that also helps us on sales. It also helps us on creating a bigger addressable market, helps us with retention. So that's why I push the team heavy on upgrades in order to drive LTV. Now on CAC, those are largely like my decisions or the management team's decisions on what our CAC is. It's like, are we or are we not going to invest in paid ads? Because it's certainly going to increase our CAC. Are we or are we not going to increase or reduce the headcount in our sales development team? We actually reduced our sales development team down from like 15 to 3 people last year. It was a painful, difficult decision, and all those people are doing fine. But I feel bad about it because we made those hires and it just didn't have the impact that we want. The timing of those hires was probably a little wishful thinking. And so, but when we reduced that team and started automating some of those things and did some training for those teams and aligned incentive for those teams a little bit better, we actually had more output, believe it or not. So those kind of decisions are on me, right? The good one, the easy ones, like, hey, let's spend a little more money on paid ads, or the hard ones, which is like, hey, let's shrink this team. Those are on me. And that's what impacts the CAC. It's not something I can give to one person and say, hey, go reduce our CAC. That's more of a system-wide.
Yeah, it needs to be more granular. Yeah. So then, while we're still on the sort of topic of metrics and KPIs, et cetera, and with your sort of knowledge and experience in professional services businesses, and as we talked about briefly earlier, I guess the differences between solutions partners in the HubSpot ecosystem right now, they're vastly more different than they were 7-8 years ago or prior to the CRM product, with more and more partners doing what we're doing, which is essentially CRM implementations, and then all the others, well, many others still doing various forms of the marketing piece for their services. But have you figured out what the most common, or I guess which metrics make the most sense for professional services businesses?
Oh, I don't spend a lot of time helping professional services businesses like maximize their own revenue and profit. I spend more time helping them think through how to market and sell their own services.
Provide value to their clients.
Yeah, that's where I'm obsessed. It's kind of what I did early on, as you know, with the HubSpot Partner Program, is helping them improve their sales. So I wouldn't consider myself an expert at running an agency. I'm not that guy.
Right.
So you know that better than I do. But of course, you obviously have a lot of overhead. You're basically, even though you're selling services, in a way, you're selling hours and some margin on top of those hours. And so I know that most agencies obsess over, what their gross margins are. Some are, focusing on growth. Some are not. You don't need to be huge in order to have for the owner to do well in a professional services business. But I don't know if I'm answering your question or not.
You are, but I think, so a lot of our clients and a lot of our listeners are also larger professional services firms, because as we know, professional services is a very, very large category, like most industries.
Yes.
So we have a lot of sort of, large engineering firms or consulting firms, again, who all consider themselves to be professional services and would completely be nodding their heads right now as you talked about gross margin and the fact that it's a very people heavy business model.
Yeah.
So in addition to I wanted to get your understanding of the HubSpot partner ecosystem. It's more the larger professional services, but if that's not your gig, we don't need to talk about it anymore. Yeah.
My observation of the HubSpot program now is that the ones that have grown at a good rate and are more profitable are the ones that have switched over to offering CRM services. Now, I think there are maybe 50 of the larger HubSpot old partners, been around forever, who maintained some of their marketing services and also expanded in that. And they're doing well. They're riding this next wave, right? They rode the inbound wave, and now they're riding the CRM and RevOps wave that HubSpot's driving. There's also a number of brand new HubSpot partners who only ever did CRM implementation. I've interviewed a few of them on our podcast. And what's interesting to me is the size of those projects, those implementation projects. Back when I was probably talking to you 15 years ago, you were selling maybe $5,000, $10,000, $15,000 website projects, right? But these CRM implementations, I'm guessing you're in this class, are, $50,000, $100,000, multiple $100,000 implementation projects, as they should be. It's complicated and
very complex
and add a lot of value. So I think there's been I've seen a lot of firms, technical consulting firms that are newer, join the HubSpot program, focus exclusively on CRM implementation, and build nice, profitable, decent sized professional services firms as a result of it. So I worry that in a few years that will be flooded as well. But I do think if like the Salesforce ecosystem is any indication, those can be medium-sized, stable professional services firms that aren't going anywhere. And there will be consolidation and all this other stuff as HubSpot continues to move upstream. So I think it's a good business to be in, for sure. I just think it's, because the word is out amongst HubSpot partners, it's like, oh, the money's in the CRM implementation. The referrals are from the CRM implementation. It's no longer a secret anymore. You're not you were an early adopter, but there's lots of new people jumping in. So I don't know how long this train will last. I'm sure it's years. Just don't know how many years.
Yeah, how many? Yeah. And it's interesting because I'm in a partner user group, as we affectionately call, PUG. Whether it's 10 or 12 of us in our monthly meetings, we all are coming at it from a slightly different angle. There are clearly folks, whether it's 30%, 50%, 60%, whatever, their strength and expertise and what they should be doing is marketing. That's what they're really, really good at. So for them, it really doesn't make sense to get into the CRM world. And I totally get that. fortunately, from like where we started, even though we were a digital marketing agency for a number of years, we were never coming at it because we were marketers. We were coming at it always trying to solve business problems, which is why the evolution for us was like, oh, we actually see the complexity of technology.
We'd rather be doing this.
Yeah,
right.
The complexity of technology is actually, we see as a bigger business problem, and a problem we want to be solving more than helping small businesses generate leads.
Yeah.
And of course, and depending on the stage of the business, every business needs both of those things at some point. It was a better fit for us to do the CRM piece.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think bigger and more established companies, they don't need a lot of leads, right? They have a lot of repeat business, et cetera, but they do need their expensive salespeople to be as efficient as possible and feed them with opportunities as well.
Correct. Yeah, and they have their own full marketing teams in-house.
Right.
And even if they do outsource some of their marketing, it's the value, when we made the switch, like I said, 5 years ago, the sales leader typically had a much bigger budget for the reason that you just mentioned. Like, if a sales leader can have a more productive team, then they want to figure out how to make that investment, Whereas, unfortunately, there's still too many organizations where marketing just doesn't get the same amount of love from the leadership team as a sales leader does.
Yeah.
Pete, then I guess the other thing I wanted to make sure we talked about, because I think it's a really interesting model, and I know it's one that you talk about a lot, directly and indirectly on LinkedIn and social media, which is your benchmark groups. Is that something you'd like to chat more about?
Sure.
And
yeah, I love talking about benchmark groups.
Yeah, and kind of how it started and what the big benefit is for people to do something similar, or even to participate in benchmark groups with Databox as a way to kind of learn about how they work.
Yeah. So as I mentioned earlier, like, it's been difficult to build Databox as a business. We were doing fine. We're profitable. We're growing 30% year over year. We're doing $8 million in annual revenue. So we're not a huge business, but we're a stable, successful business. But it's been difficult because the product is complicated, all the volume of integrations we have to support, et cetera. The other reason it's difficult is because of the question that Amy asked earlier, similar to the question that Amy asked earlier. Most companies, most business professionals, their eyes glaze over when they see a spreadsheet filled with numbers or a dashboard with a bunch of reports. In some cases, people are just literally intimidated by numbers and charts, and I have trouble empathizing with it because I'm very mathematically inclined engineer. But that is one. There's also like the complexity of systems that on top of that. So I think in order to really understand how a business works, you have to understand cause and effect. You have to understand leading and lagging indicators. You have to understand how to measure the quality of work through conversion rates, as well as the throughput of a team through the volume of work they're doing. And so you need to understand a lot of these concepts and then understand, well, if marketing does this, how does it affect sales? If sales does this, how does it affect the customer service team? If product does this, how does it affect any of those teams, right? And so I think most people get lost in trying to understand that or model that with numbers. And so what we realized is that just helping people pull all their data together in one spot and monitor and report it and set goals against it wasn't enough. And we can see, like, in our usage data that a lot of companies, unfortunately, don't even set goals or track goals, right? They're like, yeah, as long as we're doing the same or a little better, that's fine. And we'll check in next month to make sure that that's happening, right?
They just want to see up and to the right.
Yes, exactly. And so we realized, like, it's like the stuff we take for granted at Databox, and I think even the management team at HubSpot took for granted, is that, like, most business professionals don't have high numeracy. They're not really fluent in this stuff. And so we thought, was like, well, how can we make it easier? And we've already made it easier for them to point and click and, like, get a dashboard live with the right metrics. And we've tried to make that as setup process as easy as possible. But the interpretation and analysis is still relies on a human.
Right.
And so with the rise of AI models, we've been able to build a series of features that answer a bunch of business questions that elude most businesses. The first one is, how does our performance compare to companies like ours? And that's where benchmarks come in. The second one is, what is our likely performance in the future for a given metric or a given set of metrics? And that's forecasting based on historical data and user inputs. The third one is, what are the things that we can do today to impact the metrics we most care about for tomorrow, next month, or next year, right? And so that's leading and lagging indicators and understanding the correlation between metric X and metric Y. And the last one is anomaly detection, where it's like, monitor my business for me, monitor every system, every process I have, every metric that's important, and tell me when one of them dips or spikes in the way that I either do or don't want it to happen. And alert me as soon as that happens, within the day or the week or whatever the appropriate time range is, and tell me what I should jump on in order to address that.
Yeah, what does it mean?
Yes, exactly. So like, for example, you generate a lot of late leads, but the sales team for some reason doesn't log the same amount of calls. And that conversion between leads and calls, that conversion rate's not something anyone's ever going to log into a dashboard and check randomly. You might if you have a really good big sales op team. But if a computer can very quickly see, oh, okay, well, that conversion rate dropped significantly this week, so we should alert somebody to say, hey, it looks like you got a lot of leads that haven't been contacted, and dig into why. So by using these models, we can start to deliver insights to business professionals and then back that up with, of course, with the data. But the insight is the part that they have trouble gathering from the data on their own.
The insight is what blows people's minds and say, wow, I had no idea it really meant this.
Yes. And so for our partners, what we're focused on is helping them go into their clients at a much more strategic level. So instead of saying, hey, we can run your paid ads and your SEO and implement your sales systems, your CRM, et cetera, it's, hey, what are your business growth objectives, revenue and margins, right? And then what are the things you're doing? What systems are you using to measure that now? What data can we pull from that? And how can we start understanding, is your performance on par with others? What is your likely future performance? What things can we do now, next week, next quarter, to improve your ultimate outcomes? And how's that going right now? So are we on track or not? So with those conversations, right, you can go into a board or a C-level and say, like, this is how we help you manage the performance of your business so that you don't miss opportunities for improvement and that you're getting the most out of the investments that you're making.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah, which is actually how we now do our sort of 3-year roadmap with our clients.
Oh, okay. Awesome.
So we start with so what are the primary business objectives? And then we sort of break it down to tactically, well, first of all, what are the measurements you need to make sure you're actually heading towards those business objectives? And then what do we need to do tactically? So it's like a triangle. So business objectives, tactics, and measurement. And then we revisit those. So then we break it down to an annual plan, and then you break it down to a quarterly plan. So what do we need to do for the next 90 days tactically to make sure we move those numbers in a way that we know will ultimately get you to your goal in the long term?
That's awesome. And are you doing that in relation to work that you're doing, or also in relation to the work that the client might be doing?
Well, I guess both. It
is both.
What we're trying to do is help them figure out what these kinds of things that they're missing. Mm-hmm. And if they're not missing them, figure out what we need to do from a technology stack integration, single source of truth perspective, so that we help them drive the data, but which has to be mapped to the processes from marketing to sales to service, et cetera.
Yep.
So we do then a lot of the training of those teams as to, why are we tracking this data, and what is the handoff, and what are those, what are the metrics from marketing to sales? Because in many cases, they're still guessing or making assumptions or whatever. Like, to your very point, most business leaders are not as data driven as they think they are, right?
Right. Yes. And it's hard. Don't get me wrong. Like, I think to me, the math part isn't hard. The hard part is getting agreement on strategy, getting agreement on priorities, aligning resources to the work that needs to get done, executing, laying out the projects, executing, coordinating the deadlines and timeline and task sequence, like that. All that needs to happen after you build that model. Yeah. Fortunately for me, I have teams of people that do that work. It's not my strength, but that's the hard part, is connecting the 3-year vision to the daily activities and the weekly reviews and the monthly planning and the quarterly recalibration and all that stuff. That's really the hard part. That requires a lot of discipline.
We hear that a lot here, like every week. It's the soft stuff is the hard stuff. It's because it's the communication and the training and the change management component of all these things that have to happen, that's the really hard part. But of course, it's not visible.
Right.
Well, and aligning, you did mention alignment. And so I'm kind of curious because from my understanding, you have employees at Databox that are all over the world. So what are some ways that you have alignment on your teams when everybody's so spread out? I'm sure that's the case for a lot of companies today.
Yeah, it's been an iteration over time, but we have a little over 100 team members. I don't know the number of countries. It is probably 10 plus at this point. Multiple time zones, of course. Most of the team is either on the East Coast of the US, or the East Coast of the Americas, I should say, or in Central Europe, where the founding team is from. So it's like a 5-6 hour difference. Believe it or not, we operate as one functional org. So we don't have like a US or North America or America's team and Europe team like most scaled up software companies do. We have a marketing manager in Pennsylvania who manages people in one person's in Pakistan, another one's in Kuwait, and one is in Slovenia. So like he's responsible for managing that team.
It's amazing.
It's weird because the woman in Kuwait is actually from Brazil, but it's a very, very multicultural team.
Yes, United Nations.
Yeah, exactly. And so because we manage things functionally, right? Like so marketing, sales, service, product, engineering, finance people, we have org structures that are, each of the org structures are global.
Okay.
Except for product and engineering. We have product and engineering all in one office in Slovenia, where the founders are from.
Okay.
So, but because we're functionally organized, we largely do functional planning. So like each quarter, every function is responsible for saying, these are the targets we're going to hit. And these are the initiatives that we have, or these are the changes to our systems or processes that we want to implement. Of course, there's, some changes or whatever, or projects that get moved around during the quarter, but we try our best to say, this is what we're going to do this for the next 90 days and stick to it as best we can. But then on top of that, we have a OKR system that forces us to do cross-functional planning. And we do it like almost right before we do the functional planning. So again, we actually have 4 OKRs, 3 that are business heavy, and then 1 related to the team, the internal team's happiness and success. And so the 3 that are business focused, one is new customers, the other one's upgrades, the other one's retention of customers. And so each of those OKR teams have multiple people on it that span the organization. So for the acquisition OKR, we have me currently leading it. I have our support leader, we have a sales manager, we have the person who's running our paid ads, and then the person that's responsible for PQLs. And so they're in marketing, product, and sales and service. So like it kind of covers all of the teams.
Interesting.
And that way we can help each other, right? Because like as I explained before, like we might be down in one area and we can maybe make up for it in another in the funnel. But also each person kind of has an understanding of what their teams are doing. And so they can bring that to that planning and saying, these are the things we're thinking of doing over here on the product team to improve the number of product qualified leads we have. And on the marketing, support, and sales side, we can say, well, this would be something you guys should consider too, or this would be really helpful if you did that. Or it's like, oh, that makes a lot of sense. Let's piggyback on that. And we'll have this parallel project over in our support team that leverages what you're building. And so that enables us to kind of coordinate cross-functionally. We also, in addition to the OKR teams at the level, we also have our management team who then meets to review every OKR every month and how it's going, and then coordinates both the functional and the OKR planning because all of the people roll up to that management team, whether you're in an OKR group or functional planning, like you're going to ultimately roll up to this group of 6 of us. So yeah, and then we also have in parallel like our ops and analytics team, 2 members. It's 2 main members that sit in on the management team, even though they don't manage groups or teams, but they're responsible for like knowing every process we have, all the data, and managing that model so that we're not just relying on what the functional leaders are saying. We actually have independent measurement of everything that our analysts are taking a look at. And often they work together. It's not like it's competing, right? So the VP of sales is relying on that analyst sometimes, the RevOps team, to help him with interpretation of data or analysis of data. But it's an independent person or independent people that are monitoring all of our metrics, running that model, checking to see if we performed like our model said each month, and doing deeper analysis.
So that's essentially your RevOps team.
Yeah, like it's a little bit like I have a director of RevOps. She's also kind of my chief of staff. Like she helps me with running the marketing. As like I said, I'm looking for a VP of marketing. And then we have an analyst who actually sits in the product org, because a lot of our analysis involves like tracking what users do in our app. And so he needs to sit over there to like work closely with them on figuring out what to track, how to track it, analyzing it, and all that. So a lot of his job's there. But he also like helps us with financial planning and tracking our cash flow and expenses and all that stuff. Not by himself. He has other help to do that. So, but yeah, it's not, I wouldn't say I have like one clean analyst. I think we're still a little small. Like maybe when we're another 50 people, we'll have VP of finance or CFO. I imagine we'll definitely keep the RevOps team intact under the woman that's managing it now. But like I think they'll work a little more closely and maybe take some of the planning and analysis off of me and the founders' plates at some point, because we're still pretty heavily involved in setting goals and managing expenses and all that stuff down to the individual rec level and stuff.
Wow. Yeah.
Hoping to someday delegate that.
Yeah. Well, I guess, have you done much reading, Pete, into the founder's trap?
No, I can guess what you're about to tell me.
No. Well, yeah. No, I mean, I'm in a lot of sort of business peer advisory groups and have been for a long time. But it's one of those things, especially for the founders in these groups like myself. It's a real thing, and I have many scars.
It's hard. You're saying it's hard to let go of things.
Yeah,
is that what you're saying?
But the reality is, until you do, you're typically one of the bottlenecks. But yeah, it's a really
my next thing to delegate is marketing, and then there's plenty of other things I'd love to delegate too. But yeah,
but you're right. It has to be strategic and
I actually like span the whole spectrum in terms of the things I do. I like there's things that I do that are like individual contributor level. Like I lead our efforts on LinkedIn. Kind of happenstance, right? I have a following. I have experience that allows me to write things that people want to read. It's like, so there isn't someone else that could do that right now. And I think it's important to build that channel. Helps us in so many ways. And then as a manager, I'm managing some individual contributors on the marketing team. Great people. I expect them to grow into really important roles. So I don't think of it as a beneath me in any way, but I would like to have a manager for them. I think they'll be better off if they have a manager full time for them. And then, certain things where I'm still involved very heavily in the strategy setting on certain areas. So it's a little more director, VP level. And then, of course, I have to fulfill my CEO functions, report out to the board and make difficult decisions around investments and all that stuff.
Hard. So it's hard.
Yeah, it's definitely difficult balancing act. Yeah, and some days I'm like, I just need a freaking nap.
The whole.
But I'm driven by the 3-year vision. Like that to me, like I'm very driven by our vision, and so that motivates me through the things I don't want to necessarily do. It motivates me through the long days. And all that. Yeah. Someday I hope to garden and play soccer and check in on the business 2 hours a day and just rely on our software to tell me when something's off and make sure I have the right people in place to drive everything else.
Well, but this is the thing. Yeah. So you still need somebody who's hungry and is going to do all that other stuff that needs to be done. Yeah. For
sure. Yeah.
Awesome. Pete, I guess as we wrap up here, is anything you'd like to leave our listeners with as, in the form of a tip or some advice?
We actually didn't talk about the benchmarks. You teed me up perfectly, but we have this second product we built. We launched it like 18 months ago. It allows companies to benchmark their performance across 100 different tools by simply creating a free account, connecting anonymously and securely any of those tools like a HubSpot or Google Analytics or Google Ads or Facebook Ads or your YouTube or LinkedIn company page, whatever. And then instantly see how you compare to companies like yours by company size, by industry, business type, whether B2B, B2C, e-com, et cetera. And then it instantly shows how your performance compares for metrics that are common in those applications. So like if you benchmark your HubSpot account, for example, you can benchmark your traffic, your website quality, your bounce rate, your time on page, your conversion rate to lead, your landing page conversion rate, the number of CTA views you have, all the way through to the deals you're creating, your close one amounts, et cetera. So it's free, and we have tens of thousands of companies opted in so far. So there's a big data set there, but that project won't be done until like every company in the world is in there, because I'll never be able to say that the data is perfect until that happens. So, and of course that'll never happen, but we have an ambition to help lots of companies understand how their performance compares to others. So check it out. It's benchmarks.databox.
Yeah, no, that's cool. And I actually, I'm glad you brought us back to that, because as you were explaining like some of the challenges that you were having earlier on with businesses not being as data driven, what I think you sort of leaned into there was the fact that, and this is why you see so many sporting analogies in business, especially in the US, and that is that competitive nature of business leaders, right? No matter what business or functional area they're in, they're typically competitive people. And when they're just looking at data without comparison, it means less to them. But if you can suddenly tell them, you're in the 90th percentile or the 30th percentile or the whatever percentile, that suddenly the human brain just kind of understands that a lot better, and then they can kick into some sort of action, right?
Yes. And at least ask the next logical question is like, well, what could those other companies be doing that we're not doing? Or what are we doing that we shouldn't be doing? And then that leads into how to improve the business. And if they're having that conversation with someone like you, where you've seen the movie across tens or hundreds of companies, you can say, hey, well, here's what I've noticed you aren't doing, or here's what I noticed you are doing that you should stop doing, or hey, we should set this process or system up so that we can measure this and see how it impacts this more important metric that you're underperforming on. So yeah, that's what we're hoping to achieve. I think more and more companies will compete on the differentiation and value of their product. Competition is like increasingly more and more just a click away, and execution is critical, but hard, because it's just there's so many things that change in sales and marketing, especially. And so what we're trying to do is create a level playing field for execution by understanding how you're performing and what others are doing, not your competitors, but your peers, and learning from them at a more rapid pace, so that as long as you have a differentiated product and service, that you can deliver that to as many companies as possible. You can be as successful as you want in your execution. Yeah. So that's what we're trying to do.
Awesome. That's a great place to finish.
Cool.
Well, thanks so much, Pete.
All right.
I'm sure I could feel it already as we were chatting. There's definitely a lot of space here for potentially another episode at some point, but cool. We'll stay in touch.
Sounds good.
And we look forward to seeing how the benchmark group progress. We're big fans.
Yeah, no, happy to have your involvement.
Cool. Yeah. Good stuff.
Thanks, Pete.
Thanks, Pete. Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Did you enjoy this episode?
Find more at RevOpsChampions.com.